It's very automatic. They make it so anyone can do it. The only problem is it forces you to sharpen in many cases. And I don't like that. I like to decide if I'm going to sharpen. And frankly, when you sharpen an image, even in Photoshop, you know you're not sharpening it. All you're doing is building up the contrast between light and dark pixels, which gives you the illusion of sharpening. Once the image is out of focus, it's out of focus. There's really nothing you can do about it. So what you do is you end up compromising data. So let's take a look at that. Now here's a picture that I scanned in. So we see this as the nice 1970s. This was shot what in the, when was this picture made? Where Jim, right? 76. So what a great invention in the 70s. In the late 60s, they made these prints with this dimple texture so that if you stick your finger on it, the fingerprint won't really show up on the picture. But lo and behold, in the 1990s and 2000 and beyond, we're scanning everything. So when we scan it, we get to see the dimple texture. So we do lose some detail. And what's happening is the light from the scanner is reflecting inside these dimples and outside of them and giving us little weird effects. Now let's sharpen it. Now in Photoshop and Photoshop Elements, how many of you have Photoshop Elements? Good, good. That's just as good as Photoshop. And when I teach in my course and my books, I always show what you can do in Elements. So let's say I go to this and I want to sharpen, this is my uncle here. I want to make a nice big 20 by 30 print of him, and I want to sharpen. I'm just going to really just crank it out. So it looks sharper, right? A little bit? Yeah. Okay, so when we zoom in though and we take a look, we're losing detail. You see how the dark areas and light areas start to get blown out and we start to lose the subtleties. Whenever you sharpen a copy of the scan or your downloaded image from your camera. Then use that as your sharpened copy, but always keep your original unsharpened. Got it? Yes, sir, in the back.
Is there any difference in the technique you might use with your settings or any of the things you just spoke about, comparing color that you scan versus a black and white that you might scan?
I'm not sure I follow you.
Well, you got a black and white image. Would you do the same setup for it as you would for one that was just color?
As far as scanning it, would I do the same?
Yes.
Yes. And to answer even more specifically, if I have a black and white print that I'm scanning, let's see, I have one right here. Sorry. Drag that here. I am scanning this in color. You got black and white prints, black and white negatives, black and white negatives too. Scan them in color. Anybody know why? Raise your hand if you know. Yes, sir.
You get more detail, and you're able to use more features.
And do you know why you get more detail?
Because you're transferring it, you're picking up the color rather than the black and white grayscale.
Yes, you're both right. But even more specifically, I want you to understand something. In digital images, we have what's called channels. And this is, you're saying the same thing, but I just want to kind of show it to everyone. This is what's called the channels palette. Now, unfortunately, Photoshop Elements doesn't give you access to the channels through a palette like Photoshop, but that's fine. So we have the red, the green, and the blue. They appear to be the same, but they are different. They contain different amounts of information. And you get a lot more detail in the shadows, midtones, and the highlights. Now later on, in more modern incarnations of Photoshop, you have what's called the black and white adjustment, or the black and white adjustment layer. And I think it's a wonderful thing. Back before this was invented, we were using things like channel mixer and hue and saturation, which were very brutal on the image. But this black and white adjustment layer, I just turned it on now. You can hardly tell. Do you see a little cast now of color, like a green, and now it's gone? Before, after? It's some of you, don't worry if you don't notice it. There's nothing wrong with you. I'm giving you the finer points right now. So if I just did it in grayscale, or I converted it to grayscale later, it's hard to tell. I already scanned these, but believe me, if you experiment at home, scan it in grayscale, which is here. If you had the Epson, it would be this image type, and you would go to 8-bit grayscale. You could go to 16-bit if you want. Those two aren't really going to make a difference. 24-bit, 48-bit. Experiment with those. Experiment with those. Oh, I did want to bring, because this is a camera club. I haven't actually spoken to a camera club since, I think, 2000, so it's kind of different. But are any of you all working in, high bit color? This has it listed as 48-bit, but in Photoshop they call it 16 bits per channel, or 32 bits. Does anybody work in that? Got any questions about that? No? 16? You've done 16? Okay. So have you noticed a difference between 16 and 8-bit? What's the difference?
You've got a better, smoother gradation.
There you go. That's it. Really. That's it. And I noticed that too.
You've got more information to deal with.
And do you notice in the skies, especially blue skies, if you put a little polarizing filter there and it goes doom, right? And then you can really see the steps when it's not. Yeah. And do you shoot, what do you shoot with, a Canon or Nikon? Nikon, so you use Nikon RAW. Yeah. So I wanted to bring that up to everyone, that really you don't have to worry about 16-bit so much, and especially if you shoot with RAW. How many of you shoot with RAW? Raise your hand again. Good. So there's a lot. Keep doing that, because with the RAW file, it doesn't matter. You can make the RAW output, 16-bit, 8-bit, whatever, TIFF, JPEG, whatever you want. Okay, but maybe do an experiment. If you shoot a sky, a beautiful blue sky, that steps down to the horizon, and then see what happens, especially if you start color correcting it. I noticed if I don't do some heavy vignetting around the image, where it gets darker on the top and the sides and all that stuff, the banding doesn't show up. The banding. That's what you notice, especially when it's in 8-bit. So if I'm in 8-bit and I start doing some vignetting or some heavy, curves tweaking in there, I'll see banding. But when I work with the high bit, the 16-bit, I might see a little bit, but not as much. So, anyways, that would be geek speak for the rest of you. But I wanted to make sure that those who are on a higher level also get something out of this too. It's a camera club, Now, if this was a genealogy.